Today on Passion for Food, I show you how to make this ridiculously decadent Black Forest cake. This is going to be my own take on the classic that usually uses cherries and cream. Let's go ahead and get started. And for the filling, I'm going to make a cherry jam. You could of course use store-bought jam, but because of how sweet this cake is going to be, I wanted to have my jam be quite tart, so I made it myself. You can see there that we're using the red tart cherries. That's very important. And just a quick note, the jam you're going to see me actually using later, I left the cherries whole. And that worked out just fine, but I did think that the texture probably would have been a little better if they had been pureed first, so that's the version of this I'm going to show you. But if you like your cherries whole, feel free to leave them that way. The only difference is the pureeing step. Everything else is the same. I'm going to use an immersion blender here to puree these cherries, but you could just as easily use a blender or a food processor for this step. And of course, it's really up to you how smooth you want this to be. I went pretty smooth with mine. And you may have noticed I'm also using the water they were packed in. That makes it a little easier to puree, and of course there is flavor in that. Once we have a consistency we like, I'm going to go ahead and put in my candy thermometer. You don't absolutely have to have one, but it does make things a little easier. So in we go with 1 cup of sugar and the juice of 1 lemon. That's not a ton of sugar. We don't want this to be too sweet. And at this point, we just need to bring this up to temperature and let it simmer until we've boiled out most of the water. You're going to want to stick around for the first couple of minutes just to adjust the temperature and prevent any major flare-ups. You'll see mine boiled up quite a bit here, but I managed to keep it under control. And one thing you'll notice checking the candy thermometer is that the temperature is going to go up to about 212 degrees pretty quickly, and it's going to stay there. Now, the reason for that is that is the boiling point of water. So the temperature can't climb past that until we've evaporated most of the water. The only tricky part is our final temperature is only about 230 degrees. And once our water is all evaporated, it's going to climb up to that temperature pretty quickly. So we definitely want to keep an eye on this as it boils. Here we took about 30 minutes to evaporate most of our water. Once we see that temperature go above 212, it's really time to pay attention to this now. And we are shooting for about 230 degrees. But if you don't have a candy thermometer, you can use the cold plate method. All we have to do is put a small plate into the freezer to get it nice and cold, and we just drop out a little bit of our jam onto the plate. That will chill out our jam real quick and allow us to gauge what the final texture is going to be like. I was pretty happy with that, so I just let it go another minute and then we're done. You can see here and kind of gauge what the texture should be like while it's still hot. And here it is at room temperature. You can see it's set up nicely, but it's still very spreadable, so that's exactly what we want. So now let's move on and make the actual cake. This particular cake recipe is a little different from most I've seen, but it always comes out really rich and moist. It's almost halfway between a normal cake and a brownie, so I thought it would be perfect for this. So, starting with our dry ingredients, we have 2 cups of flour with 1 teaspoon of salt and 2 cups of sugar. I know, that's a lot of sugar. Then we have 2 teaspoons of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. 3/4 of a cup of cocoa. This is Dutch processed. And rather than sifting, because who has time for that nonsense, we're just going to mix it all together thoroughly with our whisk. And then it's time to go in with our wet ingredients. This is 1 cup of buttermilk, 1 cup of oil, and 2 eggs. We're just going to mix this together with our whisk, get those eggs incorporated. And once that starts coming together, we go in with 1 cup of boiling water. Yes, boiling water. And we don't want to overmix here. Just as soon as it comes together and it's nice and smooth, it's time to go into our floured baking pans. And just a rule of thumb there, don't fill these up more than 2/3 of the way to the top. Definitely err on the side of underfilling rather than overfilling. I did slightly overfill one of these, and I regretted it later. I put a pan on the lower rack there just to catch any potential spills. And so into a 300-degree oven we go. Yes, 300, not 350. And with this size pan, these are going to cook for about 45 minutes. And here they are going onto cooling racks after I've taken them out and of course checked with a toothpick to make sure they were done. You can see the one on the left has fallen a little bit in the middle. That's mostly a result of me overfilling that one, so it probably could have done with another 5 minutes in the oven. But because of that cherry filling we're going to be using, it actually doesn't matter. So while these are cooling, let's go ahead and make our buttercream. I'm going to go with 2 sticks of grass-fed butter here. I definitely love my grass-fed butter for this, and, well, pretty much everything. Before we add any of our powdered sugar, we do want to whip this butter a bit. Otherwise, we're going to wind up with clouds of sugar everywhere. And once we have that, we just start adding in some sugar. I just went based on how things were looking, but in the end, I wound up using about 10 ounces of sugar. So that's 8 ounces of butter with 10 ounces of sugar. You definitely want to stop and scrape down the bowl at least once while you're working. And finally, you want to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla and about 1 tablespoon of milk. I think the milk just gives it a nice finishing texture. So let's put together the final cake. I thought doing this outside would make for good lighting, but it turns out trying to frost a cake in sunlight is not a great idea, so I would keep yours inside. And you see that little divot here, we're actually going to make that work for us. We really don't want our cherry jam coming out the sides, so that'll actually help keep it in place there. Blessing in disguise. So we need to go on with our second layer, and it's time to frost this thing. Frosting a cake can be pretty boring stuff, so let's just go ahead and turn on Superman speed and get through this. Try and keep your frosting as even as you can. If you want to be an overachiever, you can do a crumb coat on this, but I didn't do that. And as you can see, for the most part, our cherry jam is playing along and staying put quite nicely for us. And the last thing I want to do here is just to top the cake with a little shaved chocolate. I'm going to be using this 70% dark chocolate for this. And the key to getting cute little chocolate curls is to actually use a vegetable peeler. So we're going to cover the top with shaved chocolate curls. And that's it, our cake is ready. After my ill-advised direct sunlight frosting session, I decided to let mine sit for about 30 minutes before I cut into it. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and cut a freakishly large slice and see what it looks like. And it really came out beautifully for us. The moist, dark chocolate cake really complements our tart cherry jam, and it's just a great combination. So, what foods are you passionate about? If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up below and consider subscribing for updates on our weekly videos. This has been Graham from Passion for Food.